United States of America, USA, United States America, even ism. It's quite something how many names one place can have.
It really is. And it makes you stop and think, doesn't it?
Yeah.
What is this place, really, behind all those labels?
Exactly. And for you, the learner, who wants to really get the knowledge, but, efficiently, we've gone deep into a massive source, the Wikipedia page for the U.S.
A huge resource.
Yeah.
Our mission here is to kind of sift through all that for you. Not just recite facts, but really unpack the layers, find those connections.
Yeah, even the small details, because often that's where the interesting stuff is hiding. We want to highlight what's really compelling, connect the dots for you, respect your time, but satisfy that curiosity.
Precisely. It's about understanding the nuances, the tapestry, not just the broad strokes.
Okay, so let's get into it. Starting with something really basic, but actually incredibly layered. The name itself, United States of America. Where did that come from?
Well, the very first documented time we see that specific phrase, United States of America, it's quite revealing. It's in a letter.
Oh, really? Not some big official declaration?
Not initially, no. It's a letter dated January 2nd, 1776, written by Stephen Moylan, who was actually an aide to George Washington.
Okay, January 76. That's even before the Declaration of Independence.
Exactly. And Moylan was writing about needing full and ample powers from the United States of America to go and seek support from Spain for the Revolutionary War effort.
Wow. So right from the outset, the name was being used in the context of international diplomacy, seeking recognition and help.
It seems so. It shows this early ambition, this idea of a unified entity needing to act on the world stage even before independence was formally declared.
That's a powerful detail, and then it starts appearing publicly.
Just a few months later, actually, April 6, 1776, it pops up in an anonymous essay in the Virginia Gazette.
Anonymous, okay, but public nonetheless.
Right. So the name is moving from internal communication, maybe military circles, into the public sphere. Again, just months before the declaration. It suggests they were actively, socializing the name, getting people used to it as the idea of independence grew.
Like building the brand, in a way. Getting it out there.
You could say that, and then, of course, it gets formalized. The Articles of Confederation are key here.
Right, the first attempt at a national government structure.
Exactly. The second draft, which was being worked on around mid-June 1776, explicitly states, "The name of this confederacy shall be the United States of America."
So embedding it right into the foundational document.
Absolutely. And when the final version was ratified by the states in late 1777, it reiterated, "The style of this confederacy shall be the United States of America." Style, meaning name or title. It's locked in.
So diplomatic use, public use, now legal framework, it's cementing fast. What about Jefferson's Declaration draft?
Yes. Thomas Jefferson. Around the same time, June 1776, in his original rough draft of the Declaration, he puts United States of America right there in the header, in all caps.
All caps, making a statement.
Definitely seems intentional. Whether his draft came slightly before or after the article's wording isn't perfectly clear, but seeing it capitalized in that document, the one declaring independence, it just underscores how central that name had become.
It really does. The power invested in that specific phrase. Okay, so that's the full name. But we use shorter versions all the time.
We do. United States is the standard short form. Then you've got the abbreviations US and USA, and of course just America.
Which is interesting because America can mean the continents too.
True, but colloquially, America almost always means the USA. Then there are even more informal ones like US of A, and internationally, sometimes you just hear the States.
Right, which points back to that original structure. And what about Columbia? I always find that one fascinating.
Columbia, yeah. Derived from Christopher Columbus, he was quite popular poetically back in the late 18th, early 19th centuries. People wrote songs, poems. It was even floated as a possible name for the country.
But it didn't stick, officially.
No, but it didn't vanish entirely. It lives on in the District of Columbia, the federal district. A historical echo.
A reminder of those early naming debates. Now, there's a really subtle point about grammar that reveals a lot. The whole United States is versus United States are.
Oh, this is incredibly insightful. Initially, the common understanding, and the grammar reflected this, was that the United States were a collection of separate states. Plural.
Like, these states are united.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You see it clearly in the 13th Amendment, ratified in 1865, abolishing slavery. It says slavery shall not exist within the United States or any place subject to their jurisdiction.
Yeah.
They're plural.
Huh. I never noticed that.
But after the Civil War, there was a gradual but definite shift. People started thinking of the nation as a single, unified entity. and the grammar followed. The United States became the standard.
So the language itself adapted to reflect that change in national identity, from a collection to a single whole.
Precisely. It's a fascinating linguistic marker of a major historical and political shift. You still hear these United States sometimes, idiomatically, but is dominant now.
And the people. We call them Americans. Does that term primarily mean people from the U.S.?
Overwhelmingly, yes. While geographically, America could refer to North and South America, the ethnonym American, when used for nationality, almost universally refers to citizens of the United States.
Which itself says something about the country's global presence, perhaps.
It certainly reflects historical weight and influence, and it's interesting to see how other languages dealt with it. You mentioned the Russian name.
Right. But there were longer forms, too.
Yes, historically, particularly up until the early 20th century, Russian often used more descriptive names, like North American United States, basically, or North American United States, basically, or often in the United States of North America.
Clearly locating it geographically.
Exactly, pinpointing it as those United States, the ones in North America.
Yeah.
A linguistic snapshot of how it was seen then.
Okay, so the name alone is packed with history. Let's shift gears now to the physical reality. The land itself, it's just vast.
Vast is the word. 9.8 million square kilometers. That makes it the third largest country in the world by area.
And that sheer size immediately tells you something, doesn't it? It has to be diverse.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
You simply can't have that much territory without an incredible range of landscapes, climates, ecosystems. It's almost a given.
And its neighbors. Significant borders there.
Huge borders. Canada to the north, Mexico to the south. But also, interestingly, maritime borders, with Russia to the west, across the Bering Strait and the Dateline.
Right, Alaska's very close to Russia.
Very close. And there's a maritime border with Cuba to the south, too. These geographical relationships have shaped so much history and policy.
And then the oceans. Pacific, Atlantic, Arctic, too.
Yes, the Arctic Ocean touches Alaska up north. So you have these three major oceanic influences shaping coastlines, climate, trade, culture, everything.
Which circles back to that point in the source about the very large variety of landscapes, climatic zones, flora, and fauna. It all stems from that scale.
It's fundamental. Mountains, plains, deserts, forests. It's an incredible range and something we could spend ages exploring just on its own.
And important to remember, it's not just the main block of states. Alaska and Hawaii are states too, but separate.
Crucial point. The 48 contiguous states are the main landmass, but Alaska, up in the northwest, bordering Canada and near Russia, and Hawaii, way out in the Pacific. They're integral parts of the U.S., each with its own unique geography and history.
Plus, there are those other territories scattered around.
Right, beyond the 50 states, you have island territories, mainly in the Caribbean, like Puerto Rico and the U.S. Virgin Islands, and then the Pacific Guam, American Samoa, Midway Atoll.
How do those work? Are they like states?
Not exactly. They're generally called subordinate territories or unincorporated territories. They have varying statuses, different relationships with the federal government. Some have more self-governance than others.
Okay. And the source mentions Palmyra Atoll being different.
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Palmyra is an uninhabited atoll, but the U.S. Constitution apparently applies there fully. Unlike the inhabited territories, which often have their own basic laws or organic acts, the main inhabited ones are American Samoa, the U.S. Virgin Islands, Guam, Puerto Rico, and the Northern Mariana Islands. It's a complex administrative picture.
Definitely. Okay, so back to the mainland. If you were to travel east to west across the contiguous U.S., what kind of terrain changes would you see?
It's a dramatic progression. You start on the Atlantic coast with the relatively flat coastal plain. Then you rise into the Appalachians, old weathered mountains. Not super high compared to the west, but extensive.
Okay, then what?
Beyond the Appalachians, you drop down into the Central Plains, generally lower elevation, maybe 200, 500 meters. Then the land rises again onto the Great Plains, a vast plateau, much higher, like 600 to 1,500 meters.
And finally, the big mountains out west.
The Cordillera. That dominates the whole western third of the country. It's not just one range, but a complex system of high, rugged mountains, plateaus, basins. Really defines the West.
And within that Cordillera system, you have some iconic features, like the Grand Canyon.
Oh, absolutely. The Grand Canyon is just staggering. A unique natural wonder. We're talking about a canyon roughly 1.8 kilometers deep, over a mile, and stretching for 446 kilometers. It's awe-inspiring, a testament to geological time and the power of erosion.
That geographical variety must lead to huge climate differences, too.
It absolutely does.
Right.
Because of its size and topography, the U.S. covers almost every major climate zone. You've got Arctic conditions in northern Alaska, grading down through temperate zones, subtropical in the southeast, and even tropical climates in Hawaii and the southern tip of Florida.
Which, in turn, supports a massive diversity of life and resources. Let's talk about nature and natural resources. What's underground?
The U.S. is incredibly rich in resources. Huge deposits of coal, both hard and brown coal, lots of iron ore, manganese, things crucial for industry.
And more specialized minerals, too.
Definitely. Especially out west in the Cordillera, the Colorado Plateau, Great Plains, but also the Gulf Coast. You find copper, zinc, lead, silver, chromium, vanadium, tungsten, molybdenum, titanium, polymetallic ores too, uranium, mercury.
Wow, quite a list.
And gold, sulfur, phosphates, other chemical raw materials. It's an extraordinary geological endowment that really fueled its economic development.
What about water? Rivers, lakes?
Major river systems. Rivers flowing west off the Rockies carve deep canyons towards the Pacific.
Right.
And then there's the massive Mississippi River system, with the Missouri tributary, one of the longest in the world, over 6,400 kilometers.
And the Great Lakes?
Can't forget the Great Lakes, shared with Canada, Superior, Huron, Michigan, Erie, Ontario. A huge freshwater resource, vital for transport, industry, everything.
So, the land is diverse, the resources are plentiful. What about the plants covering all this? The vegetation must be incredibly varied.
It mirrors the geography and climate. You get dense coniferous forests in the high Cordilleras out west, rich broadleaf deciduous forests, think maples and oaks, cover the Appalachians in the east.
And the prairies.
The prairies, those vast grasslands that once covered the center of the continent. Sadly, much of that is gone now, converted to agriculture. But originally, huge expanses. And then up in northern Alaska, you find tundra.
The source gets quite specific about some of the forest types, particularly in the east.
Yes, the Mid-Atlantic and Appalachian regions are noted for exceptional floral diversity. Trees like the American chestnut, though sadly diminished now, sycamore, hickory, magnolia, the tulip tree. It paints a picture of really lush, varied forests.
And it changes as you go north.
New England forests start to resemble those in coastal Canada more. You get a distinct northern pine belt, especially the Weymouth pine. The broadleaf forests generally extend south to around the Allegheny River Valley, though, nature doesn't always follow strict lines.
And the southern coastal areas sound almost exotic. Giant cypresses.
They do sound amazing.
Yeah.
Those coastal sandy strips and swampy lowlands in the southern Atlantic states, characterized by pine forests, yes, but also these enormous cypress trees with bulbous bases and strange breathing appendages coming out of the water.
Wow.
And draped in Spanish moss with dense undergrowth, vines. It's a very distinct look. Further south, South Carolina, Georgia, you get palms, orange trees, catalpas, azaleas, and Florida, of course, has truly tropical flora.
The source makes a bold claim about U.S. plant diversity compared to elsewhere.
It does. It says the U.S. has a floral richness unmatched by any other temperate zone country, except maybe East Asia. That really highlights how special its biodiversity is.
And that central forest area. The size of France, Spain, and Italy combined, that's almost unbelievable.
It's hard to fathom, isn't it? The oak, ash, elm, hickory forests that stretched from the Appalachians practically to the prairies, an immense woodland, now heavily thinned and fragmented by human activity, but originally vast. Bordered by pine to the north, firs in the southern Appalachians, swamp pine and cypress near the Gulf.
Then you hit the grasslands, the prairies. The source mentions seasonal colors.
Yes, the classic Pori descriptions mention the changing colors through the seasons: red in spring, blue in summer, gold in autumn. Beautiful image. There's debate on why the prairies formed climate, or maybe the soil type, but they were generally denser, taller vegetation than the Great Plains further west.
And west of the Great Plains, it gets drier.
Increasingly so. You move into desert steppes, dominated by plants like Chernobylnik, that's wormwood, or sagebrush, especially on salty soils. Cactus thickets start appearing. The Llano Estacado in Texas starts looking more like parts of Mexico.
But forests come back in the western mountains.
They do, but often less dense than eastern forests, more like open woodlands or parklands sometimes. Though the Mississippi Valley, interestingly, supports near-tropical crops like sugarcane and cotton due to its hot, rainy summers, even if the average temperature isn't as high as other tropical areas.
And the Pacific Coast flora versus the Rockies? Big difference.
Huge contrast. The Rockies have cacti, sagebrush, then juniper and pine belts higher up. The Pacific slope, though, gets those moist ocean winds. So you get incredibly powerful coniferous forests, Giant Douglas firs, 80, 100 meters tall.
And the sequoias.
And the sequoias in California's coastal ranges, forming these ancient, massive forests, stretching north into Canada and Alaska, and east into Idaho, Montana, Wyoming, too. Truly monumental trees.
It's just an incredible botanical richness. And underpinning all that, the source loops back to the geology, the mineral wealth again.
Right. It basically reinforces the point about the vast deposits of coal, iron, copper, gold, all those things we mentioned. It's the geological foundation for much of the nation's development and wealth.
Okay. Mind-boggling diversity in the land itself. Let's pivot now to the human story layered on top of this landscape. History. The source gives a long list of dates, suggesting it's complicated.
Extremely complicated and incredibly deep. That list is just a glimpse. We can't possibly cover everything, but hitting some key early milestones gives a sense of the foundations.
Let's do that. Start with those very first European settlements.
Okay, chronologically. The Spanish are early players. St. Augustine, Florida, 1565. That's considered the first permanent European settlement in the current U.S. mainland.
Older than Jamestown.
Yes. Jamestown, the first permanent English settlement, was founded in Virginia in 1607, then the Spanish again, out west. Santa Fe, New Mexico, founded 1609, shows their reach.
In New England.
Plymouth Colony, 1620, hugely significant historically. Then the Dutch established New Amsterdam, later New York in 1626. Massachusetts Bay Colony, the Puritans, founded 1630, with Boston becoming a major center.
So multiple European powers involved right from the start.
Absolutely. You also have Maryland, founded by English Catholics in 1634. Rhode Island, founded 1636 by dissenters kicked out of Massachusetts Bay. Even a Swedish colony, briefly in Delaware, around 1638, later taken by the Dutch. Connecticut, also founded around 1638 by settlers from Massachusetts.
And the French.
The French make a big claim in 1682, the entire Mississippi Basin. Same year, William Penn founds Pennsylvania. Philadelphia becomes incredibly important, later the capital of the colonies and the first U.S. capital.
They were spreading out. Detroit, New Orleans.
French found Fort Detroit in 1701, key for the Great Lakes. New Orleans founded 1718, controlling the Mississippi mouth. Then Georgia, the last of the original 13 British colonies, 1724. St. Louis, another key Mississippi point, founded by the French in 1763. And way out west, the Spanish start colonizing California, founding San Diego in 1769.
So by the 1770s, you have this complex mix of settlements and claims, and then things really start heating up towards revolution.
Exactly. The Boston Tea Party, December 1773, is often seen as a major spark. The First Continental Congress meets in 1774, starting organized opposition, and then the War of Independence itself, 1775 to 1783.
And right in the middle of that war, September 1776.
The Continental Congress formally adopts the name United States of America, linking directly back to our discussion about the name's origin and its formalization during the Revolution.
It all ties together. The source also flags some later, really pivotal moments.
Yeah, just briefly. The Constitution adopted 1787, Bill of Rights 1791, the Louisiana Purchase doubling the country size in 1803, the Civil War 1861-65 and abolishing slavery, World War II involvement 1941-45, the Civil Rights Movement in the 1960s.
And more recent events, too.
September 11, 2001, the withdrawal from Afghanistan in 2021, and even a mention of a proposed bill in 2025 about withdrawing from the UN. It shows history is always unfolding, always shaping the present.
A constant process of change and challenge. Okay, so how is this vast, historically layered country actually organized today, administratively?
It's a federal republic. That's the core structure, meaning power is shared between the national federal government and the 50 individual state governments.
50 states plus the capital district?
Right. 50 states considered equal subjects in the Federation, plus the District of Columbia, Washington, D.C., and that uninhabited Palmyra Atoll we mentioned earlier.
And each state functions like a mini-government.
Pretty much. Each state has its own constitution, its own legislature to make laws, an executive branch usually led by a governor, and its own state court system. It mirrors the federal separation of powers.
Where do the state names come from?
A real mix. Many come from Native American tribes or words. Others are named after English or French royalty or places. Reflects that mixed heritage again.
And below the state level, counties.
Mostly counties, yes.
Yeah.
Though Louisiana calls them parishes and Alaska calls them boroughs. They're smaller administrative units within each state, except New York City's 5 boroughs are also counties, which is a bit unique.
How many counties are there in total?
A lot. The source says 3,141 nationwide.
Wow. But the number varies hugely between states.
Dramatically. Delaware only has 3 counties. Texas has 254. It just shows how different the states are in scale and how they've chosen to subdivide themselves.
And do counties all do the same thing?
Their powers and how they interact with cities and towns within them can vary a lot depending on state law. Local life, day-to-day stuff is often governed more by municipalities, cities, towns, villages.
Okay, it's a layered system. The source lists all 50 states and D.C., just to be complete. Now let's talk about the people living in this structure, the American people, often called a nation of immigrants.
That's a common description, and largely accurate historically. Of course, the first inhabitants were the indigenous tribes, migrating from Siberia maybe 10,000 years ago. They were dominant until European colonization really took hold in the late 17th century.
And the modern population?
Largely descended from immigrants who came much later, mostly 17th to 20th centuries. Primarily from Europe, Western Europe especially, but also significantly from Africa, tragically through the forced migration of the slave trade.
The source makes a distinction between foreign-born and U.S.-born.
Yes, it notes that often full cultural acceptance as American is more readily extended to those born in the U.S., the children of immigrants. There can be a cultural or linguistic distance perceived for the foreign-born, though it says internal divisions are mostly limited to that distinction.
And racially, it's very diverse.
Extremely heterogeneous. People of Caucasian descent, tracing ancestry to the UK, Germany, Ireland, Poland, etc., are the majority in most places, except Hawaii. But there are very large and growing populations of African, Asian, and Native American descent. Together, they make up well over a third of the population. A real mix.
And the population has just exploded since the country's founding.
The numbers are staggering, from about 3.9 million in the first census, 1790, to over 331 million in 2020. That's just incredible demographic growth driven by immigration and natural increase.
With all those people from different backgrounds, there must be many languages spoken. English is dominant, but...
English, specifically American English with its own dialects, is definitely the most common native language. Around 80% spoke it natively in 2009. The source also mentions a 2025 executive order making English the official language, which is a significant political development.
And Spanish, a huge presence too, right?
It's massive. Around 35.5 million people, over 12% of the population, speak Spanish as their native language. It's the clear second language and reflects a huge Hispanic influence.
What about Native American languages? Are they still spoken?
Yes, many are, from various language families. Navajo has the most speakers. There are efforts in some places, like on reservations, to teach and revitalize these languages, which is vital for preserving that heritage.
And language laws vary by state.
They do. Hawaii recognizes English and Hawaiian. Alaska acknowledges Inuit languages culturally. New Mexico law ensures use of both English and Spanish. Louisiana gives special status to English and French, but neither is technically official.
Now, the Russian language detail was fascinating, 9th most spoken.
Apparently so. Over 882,000 speakers, more than you might think. Behind Chinese, Tagalog, French, Vietnamese, German, Korean. New York has the most speakers.
And the Alaska connection?
Right, a legacy of Russian ownership. Alaska had the highest percentage of Russian speakers, maybe 3%, understand it, and I got 8.5% are Orthodox Christian, a direct historical link still visible today. Northern California also has a notable population from Siberia and the Russian Far East.
Amazing cultural persistence. What about the island territories? Do they recognize local languages?
Yes, often alongside English. American Samoa recognizes Samoan and Chamorro. Guam recognizes Chamorro, the Northern Mariana Islands, Carolinian and Chamorro, and Puerto Rico recognizes Spanish. It respects their distinct linguistic heritage.
Okay, so a multilingual nation in practice. Where do most people live?
Cities.
Suburbs?
Overwhelmingly urban or suburban, but 82% live in cities or their surrounding areas, these sort of urban agglomerations. And half the population lives in cities with over 50,000 people.
So concentrated in urban centers, how many big cities are there?
Quite a few. 314 cities with over 100,000 people. 10 cities top 1 million, and 4 are over 2 million. New York, Los Angeles, Chicago, and Houston. These are the major hubs.
The source lists the top 20, which gives a good geographical spread of where these large populations are concentrated. Now, religion. A complex topic in the U.S. with that separation of church and state principle.
Yes, the First Amendment establishes that, originally understood mainly as preventing a national government-sponsored church like in England, protecting religious freedom.
Yet, religion seems quite important to many Americans compared to other developed nations.
That's what studies suggest. A 2002 Pew study found a higher percentage in the U.S. saying religion plays a very important role in their lives compared to many other wealthy nations. It remains a significant force in society.
Does the government track religious affiliation?
No. Doesn't keep official statistics. The numbers we see usually come from independent sources like the CIA World Factbook or research groups like Pew.
So what do those sources say? What's the breakdown?
According to the 2018 CIA Factbook data cited, Protestants are the largest group at 46.5%, Catholics next at 20.8%, then smaller groups. Mormons, 1.6%, other Christians, 0.9%, Jews, 1.9%, Muslims, 0.9%, Jehovah's Witnesses, 0.8%, Buddhists, 0.7%, Hindus, 1.7%. About 1.8% identify with other faiths, and a significant portion, 22.8%, report no religious affiliation.
And within Protestantism, it's very fragmented, right? Lots of denominations.
Very much so. Pew breaks down further. Baptists are the largest Protestant group, 15.4%, then Methodists, 4.6%, Pentecostals, 4.6%, Lutherans, 3.5% strong in the Dakotas, Presbyterians, 2.2%, Restorationists, 1.9%, Orthodox Christians. We mentioned the Russian connection in Alaska.
Right. They make up about 0.55% of the population overall. The Orthodox Church in America, OCA, granted independence by the Russian Orthodox Church, is significant. There are also large Greek Orthodox, other Russian Orthodox jurisdictions, reflects immigration patterns again. A really diverse religious tapestry. Okay, let's quickly touch on the political system that governs all this. Federal Presidential Republic.
That's the technical term. Federal means power shared between national and state governments. Presidential means the head of the executive branch, the president, is elected separately from the legislature. Republic means it's not a monarchy. And there's that key principle, separation of powers.
Legislative, executive, judicial.
Exactly. Legislative is Congress, the House of Representatives, and the Senate. Executive is the president, head of state and military commander-in-chief, plus the vice president and cabinet. Judicial is the court system, headed by the Supreme Court.
And the source names the current leaders as of May 2025. President Trump, VP Vance, Speaker Johnson, Chief Justice Roberts.
Yes, provides that contemporary snapshot of who holds key positions, along with Chuck Grassley as temporary president of the Senate and Jerome Powell heading the Federal Reserve.
And politically, it's dominated by two major parties, but others exist.
Right. Republicans and Democrats are the two dominant forces. But there are many smaller parties, too, though they rarely win major national offices.
Okay. Now, the U.S. economy. Huge, globally significant.
The largest in the world by nominal GDP. Consistently about a quarter of the world's total economic output for decades. Massive scale.
And very transparent, lots of data published.
Extremely transparent. Government agencies release tons of stats weekly, monthly, quarterly. Things like GDP, income, spending. And these numbers often get revised later as more data comes in, which is normal.
So the first number isn't always the final number?
Exactly. Revisions are common and expected in economic data. Plus, there are lots of trusted private sector indicators too, like employment reports from ADP, consumer sentiment surveys, housing price indexes.
It's a very diversified economy, a leader for a long time, though its global share has shifted a bit.
Yes, incredibly diversified. A global leader for a century. But globalization and the rise of other economies, especially developing ones since the 2000s, means its relative slice of the global pie has shrunk slightly. Still huge, though.
And consumer spending is a major driver.
Huge. It was 68% of the U.S. economy in 2019. What people buy is critical.
What about the workforce? Who employs the most people?
The labor force was over 154 million back in 2010 data. Government is actually the biggest employer overall, federal, state, local combined. In the private sector, healthcare and social assistance is the largest. Union membership is around 12% lower than Western Europe. Manufacturing jobs have seen a big decline since 2000.
The source mentions NAFTA's impact. Big increase in trade.
Significant increase. Between 1993 and 2013, U.S. exports to Canada and Mexico increased more than 5 times, and imports from them increased over 4 times. Big numbers showing tighter economic integration then.
But there's also the national debt issue.
A major challenge. Over $31 trillion, and it's been larger than the annual GDP since 2012.
And the 2008 crisis left lasting scars.
Absolutely. A major shock. Output fell, unemployment spiked, though it came down later. Confidence dropped, bankruptcies rose, inflation issues, higher fuel and food prices. Serious impacts.
The budget deficit figures from that era really show the strain.
Yes, the deficit ballooned during and after the crisis, both in dollar terms and as a share of revenue, peaking in 2009. Shows the scale of the fiscal response in the economic hit.
Quickly then, the main sectors: industry, agriculture, foreign trade.
Industry is highly concentrated, covers everything, but its share of GDP is under 20% now. Agriculture is less than 1% of GDP, but massively productive. World leader in corn and soybeans, big in GMOs. Lots of land use for pasture, forests, crops. Foreign trade. U.S. is a huge importer, number one, and exporter, number two. Trades heavily with Canada, Mexico, China. Electronics, machinery, vehicles, oil, agricultural goods are key items.
And briefly, infrastructure and energy. Sounds highly developed.
Very. Largest road network, longest rail network, most airports. Busy airspace. A Acela Express for faster rail in the Northeast. Energy-wise, second largest electricity producer. Mix of fossil fuels, nuclear, hydro, renewables. The shale revolution changed things, less oil imports. Started exporting LNG and crude oil around 2015.
Okay, and finally, culture, society. It's impossible to cover everything, but maybe some highlights. Cuisine, arts, science.
American cuisine is a huge melting pot. British, Native American roots, then waves of immigrant influences. Literature has major figures and iconic works. Philosophy from transcendentalism to pragmatism. Music is massively influential globally. Jazz, blues, country, rock, pop, hip-hop, rooted heavily in African-American traditions.
Visual arts, Hollywood.
Right. Strong visual arts scene. Hollywood dominates global cinema. Leader in science, most Nobel laureates. High R&D spending. High literacy. Lots of higher education students, including many international ones. Sports are huge. American football, baseball, basketball, hockey, soccer gaining ground. Leading Olympic nation.
Media, healthcare, military. Quick mentions.
Major TV networks. NBC, CBS, ABC, Fox. Cable, radio. Big newspapers. NYT, USA Today, WSJ. Healthcare spends a lot, mixed public-private system, issues with uninsured, but a leader in medical tech. High obesity rates are a challenge. Life expectancy rising but faces issues. Military is considered the most capable globally, largest budget. Crime rates generally fell since the 90s, but homicides rose recently. High incarceration rate.
Wow. Okay. That was an incredibly detailed journey through just one source. We've really seen the vastness, haven't we? From the name's origins tied to revolution to the incredibly diverse geography shaping everything.
History, people, languages, administration, beliefs, economy, culture. It's all interconnected. The geography influences the history, the immigration shapes the culture, the politics reflects the identity shifts.
It's even tiny details like the Russian influence in Alaska or that grammatical shift from are to is tell such big stories.
They really do. It shows how dynamic it all is. Not static at all.
So, for you, the learner, reflecting on all this, what single element stands out most? Is it the geography, the immigration story, the evolving identity, its global role? Which factor do you think has most profoundly shaped the U.S. today? And thinking about that might just unlock even deeper levels of understanding, something to ponder. Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're heading north, way north, to focus on Alaska. I've always been curious about it, beyond the cliches, and wanted to really get into the details of what makes it tick.
Absolutely. It's one of those places that feels both familiar and completely unique. And the Wikipedia entry we're using, it gives a really solid, comprehensive starting point for digging in.
Exactly. So our mission here is to unpack Alaska, its sheer size, its landscape, the history, the culture, all the essential stuff, really. We want to give you a good, solid understanding without, just reading a textbook at you.
Sounds good. It's a big topic, quite literally. Where should we start?
Let's start right at the beginning, the name itself, Alaska. It sounds evocative, but where does it actually come from?
It's from the Aleut language, the word Alaksek.
Alaksek, okay.
Yeah, and it means something like mainland or, more poetically, the object toward which the action of the sea is directed.
Wow, that's powerful. Captures that coastal reality immediately.
It really does, and the nicknames do too, don't they?
Yeah, The Last Frontier, that one's famous.
And Land of the Midnight Sun. Both paint a pretty clear picture.
Last Frontier definitely hints at that wildness, the undeveloped space.
Yeah.
And Midnight Sun, well, that speaks to its position on the globe, right? Those long summer days.
Precisely. They're not just slogans. They reflect real aspects of the state's identity and geography.
Okay, symbols. The flag is quite distinctive. Blue field, stars.
And a great story behind it. Designed by a 13-year-old Benny Benson.
13. That's amazing. What do the symbols mean? The Big Dipper and the North Star, right?
Exactly. The blue is for the sky, the sea, but also the state flower, the forget-me-not. The North Star, Polaris, signifies Alaska's northern position and, its future.
Guiding star kind of thing.
Kinda, yeah. And the Big Dipper represents the Great Bear, which is important in several indigenous traditions. It's a very thoughtful design.
And the state song Alaska's Flag actually explains the flag in the lyrics. That's quite neat.
It is unusual, yeah. It sort of embeds the symbolism directly into the song itself, making sure people know what it stands for. A narrative guide to the symbol.
All right, let's try and get our heads around the geography. The size is just staggering.
It really is. It's the biggest U.S. state, easily. Bigger than Texas, California, and Montana combined.
Combined, that's hard to picture. And globally.
7th largest administrative division in the world. That includes countries, major provinces, everything. It puts it in perspective.
7th. Wow. Okay. And its location is pretty unique, too. It's obviously the most northern state.
And the most western.
But also the most eastern. How does that work?
Ah, yes. The Aleutian Islands. They stretch so far west, they actually cross the 180-degree meridian, the international dateline. So technically, parts of Alaska are in the eastern hemisphere.
That's a fantastic bit of trivia. So northernmost, westernmost, and easternmost.
Correct. And it's also what's called a semi-exclave, the world's largest, in fact.
Okay, break that down. X got
yeah.
separated, right?
Right. It's separated from the main contiguous U.S. by Canada. But because it still has a maritime border with the rest of the U.S., it's technically a semi-exclave, not totally surrounded by foreign territory.
Gotcha. And borders.
Yeah.
Land border with Canada, Yukon, and BC.
Yep. And then that crucial maritime border with Russia across the Bering Strait with the Chukotka region.
That proximity to Russia has always been significant, hasn't it? Historically, strategically.
Absolutely. It positions Alaska as this sort of bridge, or maybe a barrier, depending on the era, between North America and Asia. It's influenced everything from ancient migrations to Cold War strategy.
And the ocean surrounding it.
To the north, you've got the Chukchi Sea and the Beaufort Sea, part of the Arctic Ocean. And to the south, the huge expanse of the Pacific.
Those must have a massive impact on climate and life there.
Definitely. They drive weather patterns, support marine ecosystems, and influence the coastal climate significantly.
Let's zoom in a bit more on the land itself. Over 1.7 million square kilometers total area.
And almost 14% of that is water. Lakes, rivers, glaciers, coastal waters. It's a huge proportion.
The latitude and longitude numbers just emphasize the scale, stretching over vast distances.
And the terrain is incredibly varied. You've got the Pacific coast, very rugged, with the Alaska range.
Home to Denali.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Then you move inland to this big interior plateau. Further north, the Brooks Range, another major mountain system.
And then it flattens out into the Arctic lowlands towards the northern coast.
It's like a whole continent's worth of landscapes packed into one state. And each region, has shaped how people live there, what life is like.
Denali used to be Mount McKinley, right?
Yeah.
The highest peak in all of North America, over 6,100 meters.
That's right. And Denali National Park surrounding it is just immense, mostly wilderness, a real icon.
And it's not the only big mountain. The source says 61 peaks over 3,000 meters. That's serious mountain country.
Very much so.
And
it's geologically active, too. Lots of volcanoes.
Oh, yeah. Like currently active.
Many are. And there have been huge eruptions historically, like Novarupta in 1912. That eruption created the Valley of 10,000 Smokes.
Right, I've heard of that. A massive event changed the whole landscape.
Absolutely. A reminder that the ground beneath is still very much alive there.
And the ecosystems reflect this diversity, too. Tundra up north, forests further south.
Boreal forests, yes. Taiga. And this supports a huge range of wildlife, adapted to each zone. Caribou, bears, eagles, salmon. It's incredibly rich.
You mentioned the Bering Strait earlier, that point about Little Diomede Island, U.S., and Ratmanov Island, Russia. How close are they?
Just about 4 kilometers apart. You can literally see Russia from Alaska at that point.
Incredible. 2 different worlds, practically neighbors.
And historically, the indigenous people there moved back and forth, so the connection was much more fluid before modern borders.
Climate-wise, we touched on it, but it varies hugely, doesn't it?
Right.
Mild and wet on the Pacific coast.
Temperate rainforests, almost. But then you get inland or go north, and it's harsh. Subarctic and Arctic continental climates. Very long, very cold winters.
That must shape everything, how you build, how you travel, daily life.
Completely. The adaptations required to live in somewhere like Fairbanks versus, say, Juneau are significant.
Okay, let's talk about the people. For such a huge place, the population is surprisingly small.
It is, around 733,000 in the 2020 census. That makes it the least densely populated state by a wide margin.
Just vast open spaces. But paradoxically, some of the physically largest U.S. cities by area are in Alaska. like Juneau.
That's right. It's often because their city limits incorporate huge areas of surrounding wilderness. It's an administrative thing, mostly.
And Anchorage is the main population center.
By far. About half the state's entire population lives in or around Anchorage. It's the hub for, well, pretty much everything transport, business, culture.
Connects the remote bits to the world.
Exactly.
A really important demographic point is the Alaska Native population. Over 15%. That's significant.
It is. Second highest percentage after Hawaii. And it represents an incredible diversity of cultures. Athabascan, Haida, Tlingit, Tsimshian, Yupik, Inupiaq, Aleut, many distinct groups.
Each with their own history, language, traditions, rooted there for millennia.
Absolutely. Their connection to the land is incredibly deep, and their cultures have shaped Alaska profoundly. Recognizing their languages officially in 2014 was a big step.
And there's also a small population descended from the Russian era.
Yes, a legacy of the Russian colonization period. In some communities, like Ninilchik or on Kodiak Island, you can still find people who speak unique dialects of Russian. Adds another layer to the cultural mix.
Religion reflects this history too, right? You mentioned Catholics and Protestants, but also a high percentage of Orthodox Christians.
That's right, the highest percentage in the U.S., actually. A direct legacy of the Russian Orthodox missionaries who came during the Russian-American Company era. Their churches are still very visible in some areas.
Interesting. Now, how is the state actually governed locally? No counties.
No, they use boroughs instead. It's a similar idea, local government providing services.
But it's not statewide.
Correct. Only part of Alaska is covered by 15 organized boroughs, plus Anchorage, which is a combined city borough.
So what about the rest? The huge, sparsely populated areas?
That's called the unorganized borough. It doesn't have its own borough government. For administrative things like the census, it's divided into 11 census areas. It's a system really tailored to Alaska's unique situation.
A practical solution for a vast, empty space. And Anchorage, Juneau, Sitka are independent cities within this.
They are consolidated city boroughs. They function as both city and borough in one unified government.
Okay, let's pivot to history. Starts way back with indigenous peoples crossing the Bering Land Bridge, right?
Thousands of years ago, yes, that's the foundational story of human settlement in the Americas, and Alaska was the entry point.
And from there, people spread out, adapted. Eskimo groups to the Arctic coast, Aleuts to the islands.
Developing unique cultures and ways of life suited to those very different environments.
And there's even evidence of contact with Asia before Columbus. Bronze and iron artifacts found near Cape Espenberg.
Yes, about 1,000 years old. It suggests some level of trade or interaction across the Bering Strait much earlier than we used to think. Really fascinating stuff, though the details are still being researched.
Then the Russians arrive, officially discovered in 1732.
By the crew of the Esquivrilya, though there might have been earlier unrecorded visits. But 1732 marks the start of sustained Russian interest.
Which led to the Russian-American Company running the show from 1799 to 1867.
Right. Nearly 70 years of Russian administration focused mainly on the fur trade, especially sea otters. They established settlements, missions, left a definite mark.
Until the sale, 1867, the U.S. buys Alaska for $7.2 million. Why did Russia sell? It seems like a bargain.
Well, several reasons. After the Crimean War, Russia felt Alaska was vulnerable, hard to defend, and expensive to supply. They were worried Britain might just take it.
So better to sell it to the U.S.
Pretty much. Get some cash, avoid losing it for nothing, maybe strengthen ties with the U.S. as a counterweight to Britain. Plus, the fur trade was declining, so they probably didn't see huge future profits there.
And that price, $7.2 million. About $157 million today. Still sounds low for all that land.
Per square kilometer, it was actually cheaper than the Louisiana Purchase. Shows how it was valued at the time, mostly seen as remote, frozen territory. Seward's Folly, some called it.
Until they found gold.
Well, first the transfer. October 18th, 1867, that's Alaska Day now.
Right. Then, nearly 30 years later, the Klondike Gold Rush kicks off in 1896.
Yeah, although the richest finds were over the border in Canada's Yukon Territory, the rush massively impacted Alaska. Thousands flooded through, towns like Skagway boomed, infrastructure got built.
And a lot of gold came out, maybe 1,000 tons.
An incredible amount. It really put the region on the map and changed its trajectory, even if it caused huge disruption too.
Then Alaska went through different phases. District of Alaska, then just district, then territory.
Before finally becoming the 49th state on January 3, 1959. It was a long road to statehood.
Decades of pushing for it. Statehood must have been a huge deal.
Absolutely. Full representation, more control over its own affairs. A major milestone.
And then, not long after statehood, came the next big game changer. Oil. Prudhoe Bay, 1968.
Massive discovery, one of the largest oil fields in North America. It completely transformed Alaska's economy.
Leading to the Trans-Alaska Pipeline. That must have been an epic construction project.
Incredible feat of engineering, 800 miles from Prudhoe Bay on the Arctic coast, down to Valdez on the Pacific. Completed in 1977, across mountains, rivers, permafrost.
It's been the economic engine for decades, hasn't it?
Hugely important. But it also brought risks, as we saw with the Exxon Valdez spill in 1989.
A terrible environmental disaster in Prince William Sound.
Horrific. It coated shorelines with oil, killed wildlife, a stark reminder of the potential costs of oil transport. It led to major changes in safety regulations like double-hulled tankers.
So the economy today, still heavily reliant on oil and gas.
Yes, oil and gas are still dominant. Commercial fishing is also the huge salmon, halibut, crab, a major industry.
And the source compares Alaska's oil fields to places like Siberia and the Arabian Peninsula. That's significant.
It shows its scale, yeah. It's a major player in global energy. And they found more oil recently, did they?
Yeah, a big discovery in 2017, 1.2 billion barrels estimated, so oil isn't going away anytime soon.
Seems unlikely. But the state did try to manage the wealth with a permanent fund, right?
Yes, tell us about that. Established in 1976.
Right. They took a portion of the state's oil revenues and invested it, and part of the earnings are paid out each year as a dividend to nearly every permanent resident.
So Alaskans get an annual check from oil money?
Basically, yes.
Yeah.
The amount varies, and there's always debate about how much to pay out versus reinvesting. But it's a unique system, a way of sharing the resource wealth directly.
What else drives the economy? Military bases?
Tourism. Both are very important. There's a large military presence, which brings jobs and investment. And tourism is massive. People come for the scenery, wildlife, cruises, adventure.
Makes sense. And a huge chunk of the state is federally owned land, isn't it?
Over half, yeah. National parks, forests, wildlife refuges, great for conservation, but it also means lots of debate about land use, access, and resource development.
Okay, language and culture. English is dominant, but what about the native languages?
There's incredible diversity. At least 20 distinct Alaska native languages, plus dialects, from different language families like Eskimo Aleut and Athabaskan Ayak Tlingit, and some isolates like Haida and Tsimshian too.
A real linguistic treasure trove. Are they widely spoken?
Many are endangered, unfortunately, but there are strong revitalization efforts underway. And that official recognition in 2014 helps raise their profile and support.
And those Russian dialects still surviving in places like Ninilchik.
Yeah, a fascinating linguistic holdover from the past, a unique part of Alaska's heritage.
Let's talk transportation. Getting around such a huge, rugged state must be a challenge. Roads are limited.
Very limited, especially connecting to the outside world. The Alaska Highway through Canada is the main road link.
And within the state, the Alaska Railroad.
That's important, yeah. Runs from Seward up to Fairbanks through Denali Park. It's vital for freight and passengers, especially in the interior.
And it has that cool flag stop system.
Yeah. In remote areas, people can literally flag down the train with a white cloth to get picked up. Very Alaskan.
What about coastal communities?
The ferry system, the Alaska Marine Highway, is crucial. It connects all the coastal towns that often have no road access at all. It's basically their highway.
And flying must be essential.
Absolutely critical. Air transport is highly developed. Almost every little settlement has an airstrip. Bush planes are a way of life for many people.
Even international flights, like to Russia.
There are charter flights between Nome, Alaska, and Providence in Russia during the summer. But it's limited. Visas and border rules make it tricky. Still, it shows that connection is there.
So just to recap neighbors, Canada to the east, Yukon, BC, Russia to the west, across the water, Chukotka.
That's the geographical setting.
Okay, we've covered a lot of ground. It really is a place of immense scale, incredible natural beauty, and a really complex history. Indigenous roots, Russian influence, American statehood, resource booms.
It's a fascinating mix. The geography dictates so much, but the human history and cultural layers are just as compelling. It really exemplifies how place and people shape each other.
Definitely. So looking ahead, what's the final thought you'd leave our listeners with about Alaska?
Well, considering its strategic spot, especially with the Arctic opening up due to climate change, its vast resources, and its unique population, how is Alaska's role going to evolve this century? Think about climate impacts, international relations in the Arctic, how they manage those resources sustainably.
Lots of big questions.
Huge questions. Its future seems just as complex and fascinating as its past. There's definitely more to explore about this remarkable state.
A perfect place to end our deep dive for today. Thank you for joining us.
Welcome to a brand new deep dive. Today, we're taking a close look at Canada. You might think you know it, but we're going beyond the usual stuff.
We really are. Forget the quick overview. We're aiming for a deep, detailed understanding, almost like getting an internal briefing.
And our main source for this exploration is, interestingly, the Russian Wikipedia page on Canada.
That's right. Now, some might find that a bit unusual, but a well-developed Wikipedia page, especially one like this, can offer a surprisingly broad and structured look.
Yeah.
Our mission, really, is to comb through this information meticulously.
Extracting the key facts, the interesting details.
Exactly, and really unpack what makes Canada, well, Canada, according to this particular source.
Okay, let's start right at the beginning. The name, Canada. Simple enough, you'd think.
Well, yes and no. Even here, there's a bit of nuance. In English, we say, his kin.
Right, that familiar sound.
But in French, which is also an official language, it's Canadad.
Yeah.
A subtle difference, but it's there.
And that tells you something right away, doesn't it? That bilingual nature isn't just policy. It's baked right into the name.
Precisely. It's not just linguistics. It's like a tiny window into that cultural duality, that English-French interaction that defines so much of Canada. We'll see that pop up again and again. And the source is careful to point out we need to distinguish this Canada from other terms like the Russian hoyi, which apparently means cannabis.
Ah, okay. Good clarification. Shows why context matters, especially across languages.
Definitely. So, moving on to the symbols, the flag, of course, very iconic with the maple leaf.
Instantly recognizable.
Then you have the aji, that's the coat of arms. It's quite complex visually, representing history, heritage.
A lot packed in there. And the A, the motto.
Yes, the motto is Latin. Amari usque ad mare.
Which translates to from sea to sea. Wow, that really captures the scale we're talking about.
It absolutely does. It speaks to that original vision of a dominion stretching right across the continent, Atlantic to Pacific. It sort of foreshadows the geography we'll get into.
And using Latin adds that historical layer, too.
Right. And finally, the OP, the national anthem, O Canada. Each of these isn't just for show. They're like symbolic stories.
Okay, so history and symbols set the stage. Let's talk about how Canada actually became independent. It wasn't just one day, was it? Our source outlines 3 stages.
Yeah, it's a fascinating gradual process. First up, July 1st, 1867, the British North America Act.
So what did that do exactly? Confederation, right?
Pretty much. It brought several British colonies together into the Dominion of Canada, a huge step towards self-government, but crucially still within the British Empire, not full independence yet.
Right, so the groundwork was laid, but London still held the ultimate reins, constitutionally speaking.
Exactly. They managed domestic affairs mostly, but the UK Parliament had the final say on big things, like changing the constitution or foreign policy.
Okay, stage 2, December 11th, 1931. The Statute of Westminster. What changed then?
This was a major loosening of ties. It basically said Canada and other dominions were autonomous, equal in status to Britain, and could make their own laws without UK override.
So much more independent. Control over foreign policy, laws.
Almost entirely. But, and this is a key but, Canada actually asked Britain to keep the power to amend Canada's constitution.
Really? Why?
Because the federal government and the provinces couldn't agree on how they would amend it themselves, on a formula. So that specific constitutional link remained even after 1931.
Huh. That's interesting. Which leads us to the final date, April 17th, 1982, the Canada Act. Our source calls this independence from the UK.
And that's accurate. This is when Canada finally patriated its constitution.
Meaning brought it fully under Canadian control.
Precisely. Gained the full power to amend its own constitution, established that amending formula they couldn't agree on earlier, and embedded the Charter of Rights and Freedoms. That last tie to the British Parliament was severed. Full sovereignty.
A long road then. 3 distinct steps. Okay, so this independent Canada, 2 official languages, English and French. We heard it in the name pronunciation. How does that play out day to day?
Well, it's constitutionally mandated. Equal status at the federal level, parliament, courts, all federal services have to be available in both languages. There are protections for minority language communities across the country, too. It's a core principle reflecting those 2 founding European cultures.
And the capital city where this bilingual government sits is Ottawa. But it's not the biggest city, is it? Toronto holds that title.
Right. And that's not unusual for capitals. Ottawa was actually chosen by Queen Victoria back in 1857, partly as a compromise.
A compromise between who?
Between the bigger rival cities of the time, Montreal and Toronto. Its location was also key right on the border between the primarily English Upper Canada, now Ontario, and the primarily French Lower Canada, now Quebec. Sort of a neutral, symbolic choice.
Makes sense. Let's look at those big cities. The 2021 figures show Toronto leading with about 2.8 million people.
Followed by Montreal at around 1.8 million.
Then Vancouver. Calgary at 1.3 million. Edmonton, just over a million. What does that pattern tell us?
Well, it shows population concentration mostly in the south, near the U.S. border, and along major transport routes. Toronto and Montreal are the historic centers, English and French Canada, respectively.
And the western cities. Vancouver, Calgary, Edmonton.
Their size points to the importance of the West resources, Pacific trade. It really underlines how vast and, in many areas, sparsely populated the rest of the country is.
Right. Now, the system of government. The source describes it as a constitutional monarchy and a federation that's the sochirochi or state structure.
Okay, so constitutional monarchy first. There's a monarch, King Charles III, currently, as head of state.
But mostly symbolic, right? The monarch reigns but doesn't rule.
Exactly. The day-to-day governing is done by the elected government. The monarch, or their representative in Canada, the Governor-General, that's Mary Simon, handles ceremonial duties, represents continuity.
So the real political power is with the Prime Minister. Now, our source lists Mark Carney. Just a heads up for listeners. As of now, May 2024, the Prime Minister is actually Justin Trudeau.
Yes. That's a good point. Information, especially names, can have a slight lag in even comprehensive sources. Things change.
Good reminder. But the structure holds. PM as head of government, responsible to Parliament. And the Chief Justice, head of the judiciary, is Richard Wagner.
Correct. An independent judiciary. And that federal structure power shared between the national government and the provinces and territories adds another layer. It's a blend of tradition and parliamentary democracy.
Okay, let's swing back to the sheer size. Nearly 10 million square kilometers, second largest in the world.
Just immense.
And of that, over 9 million square kilometers is land. But wow, 8.62% is water surface. That seems like a lot of water.
It is. All those lakes and rivers. It's a massive freshwater resource that's shaped history, transport, industry like fishing and forestry, and obviously the ecosystems. It makes Canada a huge player globally when it comes to freshwater.
And part of that landmass includes, get this, over 52,000 islands.
52,000. It's almost impossible to picture.
The biggest is Baffin Island, over 500,000 square kilometers itself. Bigger than many countries. What does having all those islands mean?
Well, it contributes to that incredibly long coastline we'll get to. It means complex geography, diverse ecosystems, significant indigenous populations on some, and of course, challenges for governing, providing services across such a spread out area.
And if you go far enough north, you hit the tree line. Over a quarter of Canada, 27%, is north of it.
Yeah, so that's Arctic and subarctic climate. Tundra, permafrost, long cold winters, too harsh for trees. It's ecologically unique and vital for global climate systems.
Very sparsely populated up there too, I imagine.
Extremely, which brings its own set of challenges for infrastructure and living.
Speaking of the far north, the source highlights alert in Nunavut, the world's northernmost permanent human settlement.
Right, a Canadian Armed Forces base, incredibly remote, only about 800 kilometers from the North Pole on Ellesmere Island.
Why have a permanent base there?
Several reasons. It asserts Canadian sovereignty in the Arctic, which is increasingly strategic. There's national security, surveillance, plus it's a vital research station studying the Arctic environment, climate change, even space weather. A real symbol of presence in the high Arctic.
Okay, let's talk people. Ebony, Canadians. The estimate for 2023 was around 40 million.
Which was already up quite a bit from the 2021 census figure of just under 37 million.
In the source notes, it even passed 41 million in March 2024. That's some fast growth.
It is, mostly driven by immigration, which is central to Canada's demographic policy.
But here's the flip side. Population density is incredibly low. Just 4.2 people per square kilometer, ranking 185th globally.
That combination, rapid growth, low density, is key. Growth brings diversity, dynamism, but the low density makes providing services like healthcare, transport across that vast space a constant challenge. Creates regional disparities too.
Let's look at the economy. GDP figures for 2024. Based on purchasing power parity, or PPP, It's about 2.6 trillion US dollars, 16th globally. Per person, that's around $63,000, ranking 30th.
Okay, and then the nominal GDP.
Nominal is about 2.2 trillion, 9th globally. Per person, around $54,000, 19th.
So a very large developed economy. The difference between PPP and nominal per capita hints at a relatively high cost of living, perhaps. Strong rankings overall, but remember those are averages, doesn't show wealth distribution or regional differences.
Good point. Now, human development. The HDI, Human Development Index for 2022 was 0.935. That's very high. 18th place globally.
Very good score.
But the source mentions a deterioration or decline in the ranking back in 2020 when they started factoring in planetary pressures. That's really interesting.
It is. It reflects this growing idea that you can't separate human well-being from environmental sustainability. Canada scoring so high on traditional metrics, health, education, income, but slipping when environmental footprint is added suggests, well, a potential imbalance.
Raises big questions about how we measure progress now, doesn't it? Balancing development and the environment.
Absolutely. It's a critical challenge for many developed nations.
Okay, let's tick off some of those granular details the source provides. Currency, Canadian dollar, CAD, code 124.
Standard stuff. Internet domain.ca. ISO and IOC code, FIGO-M.
Telephone code +1, shared with the US and others in the North American plan. Time zones, quite a spread. UTC 3.30 to UTC 8.
Reflects that huge east-west span and Higanua traffic.
Drives on the right. And the source mentions Willows, Wikimedia Commons, lots of related media files available.
See, even those small details add to the picture. Time zones affect daily life, codes matter for international interaction. Even which side of the road you drive on is practical info.
Right, so zooming back out geographically, North America, biggest on the continent, second biggest in the world, coastlines on 3 oceans, Atlantic, Pacific, Arctic.
Which gives it the longest coastline in the world. Over 202,000 kilometers, just staggering.
What does having borders on 3 oceans mean?
Huge implications, geopolitically, economically, access to shipping routes, environmentally massive marine ecosystems to manage, climate influence. Also big challenges for security, surveillance, especially in the Arctic as it changes.
And neighbors. Who does Canada border?
Well, the big one is the United States to the south, and also northwest with Alaska. That's the world's longest shared border.
A massively important relationship, obviously.
Absolutely. Deep economic ties, cultural links, security cooperation. Then to the northeast, there's actually a land border with Denmark now on Hans Island.
Oh yeah, that was that island they disputed for ages and finally just split down the middle, right?
Exactly. A fascinating, peaceful resolution. Highlights a certain approach to international relations. And finally, there's a maritime border with France.
France, how?
Through the French islands of Saint-Pierre and Miquelon, just off the coast of Newfoundland, a little piece of France and North America, creating that sea border.
Huh. So the US, Denmark, and France are the bordering countries, each relationship unique.
Definitely shapes Canada's foreign policy and global position in different ways.
Lastly, the source just touches on the origin of the name Canada, mentioning its indigenous roots. Doesn't elaborate much here.
But even mentioning it is crucial. It immediately connects the modern country's name to the First Peoples. The word Canada is widely believed to come from the Huron-Iroquois word Canada, meaning village or settlement, acknowledging that origin is fundamental to understanding the land's deeper history and the ongoing efforts towards reconciliation.
Okay. Well, that wraps up this incredibly detailed first pass through Canada, based very closely on our source material. We've covered a lot of ground names, symbols, independence, government, geography, people, economy. Really trying to hit every point mentioned.
Yeah, we've definitely gone beyond the surface level here, digging into the specifics presented in this source. It gives you a pretty solid, detailed foundation, I think.
So as we finish this deep dive, here's something specific to think about, linking back to that unique independence story. Canada reached full independence in those 3 distinct stages, 1867, 1931, and finally 1982. How might that gradual, step-by-step evolution have shaped the national identity, or maybe its approach to sovereignty and global affairs, differently than countries that had a more sudden break, a single independence event?
That's a really interesting angle, the psychology of a gradual process versus a revolution, perhaps.
Exactly. Something to mull over. Think about how all these details we discussed, the geography, the bilingualism, the governance structure might interconnect, influenced by that unique path. We hope you found this detailed examination useful, and maybe it sparked your interest to explore some areas even further.